breakout success of Friday the 13th, a sequel was a guarantee. But the killer was dead, decapitated by the final girl of the first entry. How could Paramount possibly turn this single film into a franchise? The answer was simple. Take that last-minute jump scare ripoff of Carrie and turn it into a semi-canon event. Friday the 13th Part 2 saw the official introduction of what would become a mainstay of the franchise, Jason Voorhees, though not in his final form, of course. Released less than a year after the first, Part 2 greatly expanded the lore of the franchise and greatly increased the quality of the series. Despite its rushed production, the movie is a major step up from the first film and serves as one of the high marks of the entire franchise. Let's dive in. The movie opens 2 months after the conclusion of the first. We get a foot's-eye view of an approaching figure walking down the street, splashing in the water. We cut to a small house where Alice from the first film is having a fitful dream. This dream serves as a previously on segment for the audience, providing the Cliff's Notes version of the first film. She wakes up clearly upset, showing us that she is still suffering from the trauma of the murder spree at the camp. Her mother calls her and expresses concern for her, as Alice puts some water on to boil. She makes her way around the house and opens the refrigerator only to find the rotting head of Mrs. Voorhees. She screams in terror as an unknown figure grabs her from behind and drives an ice pick into the side of her head. As the figure leaves, he removes the squealing teapot from the heat. We jump ahead 5 years, where Paul Holt is attempting to start a school for camp counselors. We're introduced to several prospective counselors, only about half of which are important to the movie. There's couple Sandra and Jeff, Scott, Terry, Vicky, Ted, and wheelchair-bound Mark. They, along with many of the nameless counselors, have been gathered for some initial instructions about operating in the woods when the heroine of our story and Paul's love interest, child psychology student Jenny, arrives in a faulty vehicle. That night, Paul gathers the counselors around the campfire to tell them the legend of Jason Voorhees, a boy who drowned at the camp 20 years earlier. In a vengeful rage, his mother killed 2 counselors the next year, and even more 5 years ago, before she was killed by the final survivor. According to the legend, Jason actually survived the drowning and witnessed the death of his mother. Angered by the loss of his mother, he set out to kill anyone who enters the woods or tries to reopen the camp. He assures them all that Jason is just a legend and tells them that Camp Crystal Lake is off limits. Later that evening, Crazy Ralph makes another appearance to warn the counselors of the dangers they are in, but he is garroted from behind and killed. The next day, Jeff and Sandra, who are definitely not Jack and Marcy from the previous film, decide to sneak onto the camp property to see what they can find. They find a dog carcass and are surprised by Sheriff's Deputy Winslow. Winslow takes them to Paul and demands they be punished for going to the camp. Paul assures him that they will be dealt with. On the way back to the station, Winslow catches sight of a man wearing a burlap sack on his head, wandering around the camp, and rushes in, figuring that another of Paul's kids have trespassed again. He finds a decrepit hut in the woods and starts to investigate. Before he can do anything else, the killer hits him in the back of the head with a claw hammer. That night, Paul gives the campers one final night out on the town before their training begins the next morning. As punishment for their trespass earlier, Jeff and Sandra are forced to remain behind. Joining them are Mark, worried that his handicap will bring down the partying, Vicky, who has a crush on Mark, Terry, and her near-stalker Scott. While Jeff and Sandra go upstairs for some alone time, Terry opts for a late-night nude swim in the lake. Scott, attempting to be charming, steals her clothes and taunts her, and stumbles right into a trap. Terry leaves to get a knife to cut him down, but the killer arrives first and kills him. Terry returns to find his dead body and screams right into the camera, which apparently leads to her death. Back at the cabin, Vicky is doing her best to flirt with Mark. She steps away to get ready, leaving Mark alone on the deck of the cabin. While he's waiting for her, he gets a sudden machete to the face, causing his wheelchair to roll down a long flight of stairs going down to the lake. This is one of the iconic kills of the series, up there with the arrow through the neck from the first movie. Back inside, the killer, now undoubtedly known to be Jason, grabs a spear used in a practical joke earlier and goes upstairs, where Jeff and Sandra have just finished having sex and are cuddling with Jeff lying on top of her. Sandra opens her eyes just in time to see Jason plunging the spear toward them, impaling the two of them and the mattress. This is also counted among the best kills of the franchise, despite all the footage the MPAA forced the filmmakers to cut. It's a memorable kill that you don't often see replicated. This kill was done with a fake body in the bed and the actor standing in a hole under it. The shoot took hours to get right and the actors were very uncomfortable, until a set guy blew a powder of unknown origin into one of the actors' faces. According to the actor, he was in a euphoric state for hours afterward. The 80s were a heck of a time to make movies. Vicky returns to the cabin but cannot find Mark. Thinking he went upstairs, somehow. She goes to find him, but finds Jason instead in his iconic baghead form. Jason's look in the film was a last-minute addition to hide the hideous guise underneath, emulating the Elephant Man from years prior. We'll talk more about Jason at the end of the recap. Jason raises a knife in a nice overhead stalking shot, another memorable one, and kills Vicky. Back at the bar in town, Paul, Ted, and Jenny are partying with the nameless counselors and some townspeople. Jenny treats the legend of Jason seriously and postulates on what someone like that would be like now. Eventually, Paul and Jenny head back to the camp, leaving a drunk Ted to supervise the others and ensure everyone gets back to the camp later. Paul and Jenny return to the camp to find it empty. They go upstairs and find the bloody bed before the lights go out. The two of them search the darkened cabin, and Jenny gets an odd feeling that they are not alone in a truly creepy scene that evokes memories of our own about entering rooms that just don't feel right. Her fears are realized when Jason jumps out of the shadows and attacks Paul, incapacitating him. Jenny begins running through the cabin with Jason in hot pursuit in a truly frantic and nerve-wracking scene. She escapes the cabin and tries to flee in her vehicle, but the former problems come back to haunt her and it won't start. She flees into the forest and finds the shack. She enters and looks around, giving us a great shot of Jason approaching through the window. You might miss it, but it's a terrifying visual for those who see it. Jenny locks the door and looks around for some way out and discovers Mrs. Voorhees' head in a makeshift shrine along with her sweater. Using her child psychology training, she thinks of an idea. She puts on the dirty sweater and pretends to be Jason's mother in an attempt to manipulate the killer into letting down his guard and kneeling before her. She tries to kill him with a machete, but when she shifts her weight, Jason catches a glimpse of his mother's head and realizes he's been deceived. He attacks Jenny, but Paul gets there just in time and begins to fight Jason. During the scuffle, Jenny is able to drive the machete into Jason's shoulder, killing him. Before they leave, they pull off Jason's bag mask, revealing his face to only them. They return to the cabin and are surprised by a sound at the door. Paul approaches and opens the door to find the dog, Muffin, sniffing around. The tension is broken and relief fills the room. Suddenly, an unmasked Jason bursts through the window and attacks Jenny, showing his hideously deformed face. Suddenly, Jenny wakes up on a stretcher, being rolled away by some paramedics. Our final shot is an image of Mrs. Voorhees' head, with Jason's body mysteriously missing. This is a great movie that really serves to give the franchise staying power. The characters are pretty well developed for a horror movie, especially Paul and Jenny. The kills are inventive and memorable, with 3 in a row being ranked among the best and most iconic of the series. The final girl is resourceful, intuitive, and resilient. She is a great example for modern filmmakers on how to craft a strong female character without turning them into a girl boss who easily beats up willing and cooperative stuntmen. Jenny never grapples with Jason, but the two of them are in a physical competition, forcing Jenny to be clever. Upon getting trapped in Jason's hut and seeing Pamela's head and sweater, she uses her child psychology training to manipulate Jason. It was only a poorly timed shifting of her body that foiled her plan to beat him. She is the best of the final girls for the franchise. The film sees the introduction of Jason, who will become a mainstay for the remainder of the franchise. Another mainstay of the franchise is how little continuity there is between each iteration, particularly concerning Jason. Over the course of the movies, there is some mainstreaming of Jason's look, with some bits of damage to Jason or his mask carrying over to the future installments. But this is definitely the outlier. There's no hockey mask, there's no jumpsuit, there's no invincible zombie. Often called Baghead Jason, this version of the killer is more violent hillbilly than invulnerable monster of later films. He is undeniably human in this film, openly running and falling down, showing fear and getting hurt. In later films, Jason bursts through doors and seems to travel over long distances in short periods of time despite only methodically walking everywhere. But not in this movie. He's clumsy and, at times, bumbling. However, none of this ever distracts from his intimidation factor. I really think this is an underrated version of Jason that we didn't get to enjoy for long enough. His unmasked form in the film consisted of a facial appliance and dentures that the stuntman had to wear, which apparently made breathing very difficult. The jump scare terrified me when I first saw it as a child, and it still gives me nostalgic goosebumps every time I watch this movie. Friday the 13th Part 2 did not do as well as the first, making only $21.7 million off a budget of $1.25 million. However, it was still a big success for Paramount and was, in my mind, one of the best films of the series. Better yet, the killer was killed in an ambiguous way with a machete in the shoulder instead of a decapitation, meaning he could be used again. Due to its success, a second sequel was fast-tracked, coming out a little over a year later, but this time in 3D. We'll discuss Part 3 next October. Until then, let me know what your favorite horror movie is down below. Happy Halloween, and thanks for watching.